Okay, so today we're going to be working on getting some things out of my freezer. So I've got room for that whole beef. We're going to make beef broth. I'm going to can two different types of meat, and we're going to make some sourdough crackers. So I can't wait to show you all the things. Today I am making some extra room in my freezer, so I'm going to be canning up a ton of chicken broth. I can't wait to show you how I like to make it. It's kind of a combination between broth and stock, but it's how we like to eat it. So let's jump right on in. All right, so when I buy chicken, I buy it a case at a time at least, and I buy the whole chicken, and then we part that out for what we need. Sometimes I keep some of them whole and I'll roast the whole chicken, but many times I want the breast for specific items. I want to make leg quarters on a different night, and I save all the wings for wing night. So I end up with the backs and the necks. So what I do is go ahead and bag those up, freeze them until I either need the freezer room or have enough to do a big batch like this. So right now I've just taken all these out. I soaked them in a little water to cool them off. And I have them in freezer bags here. I believe this one has 2 backs in it. I do like these a little bit better once they've been roasted. So I'll pull these out and then I just pop them in the oven for about an hour at 350, just until they've released a lot of their juices. So this is 4 backs that I've thrown into a casserole dish, and they've been in the oven. I put a little bit of salt and pepper on them. I just feel like it gives a little bit of a different flavor. So after I pull that out, I'm going to let it cool off. I'm going to pick off any remaining meat. Again, this is me or the kids pulling the meat off the bone, so it is not perfect. There's definitely some left. I will pull the meat off and then use that for my canned chicken. You know, at this house, we really love tuna fish. And unfortunately, because we don't want to be eating tuna fish every single day, I just feel better about these organically raised chickens. So I will can chicken meat and use that in place of tuna fish for different items. So I'll go ahead and swap these out. I'm going to drain this. I'll put the broth that's remaining into my big roasting pan. That's going to cook overnight. And then I will reload it with some more backs and put it back into the oven so it can cook the next batch. I'll pull the meat off. That is a little bit tedious, but definitely worth it. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and pour this into the bottom of my roaster. And then once my bones pull off enough and I could pull the meat off, I'll add the bones back to this and make my entire container of chicken broth stock. Again, this is a really big roasting pan. We have a large family. I like to do things in big batches. You could absolutely do this in smaller batches, but this is a 26-quart roaster. So now I will just load up the rest of my chicken. Don't touch that because it is hot. Have to keep reminding myself. And because this is raw chicken, I'm going to go do this over by the sink so that I have one area to clean up, but you guys know how to load up chicken. All this homemade cooking, it's always so many dishes, but it's so worth it. Okay, so I'm going to sprinkle that with a little bit of salt and pepper, and then throw it into my 350-degree oven for about 45 minutes to an hour. Give it a little cook and make some of that meat come off the bone a little bit easier. But just to kind of give you the before and after, those were my 4 that I just pulled out. Here's my 4 that I'm putting in. And I'll go ahead and throw these in the oven. I am going to be adding 1 additional back whenever I roast the whole chicken. After we have it for dinner, I will take the rest of the meat off the bone. And then I have 1 that was a whole roasted chicken. I just pulled the meat off, went ahead and took it apart. So there's still going to be a little bit of extra meat for us to pull off on this to add to the mix as well. We just didn't eat it that night. But again, I've got that whole beef coming and I need to make room in the freezer. So this is what we're doing. These are not quite cool enough. Okay, yes, I realize that this is my own kitten and I do not have to wear gloves, but honestly, I hate having things underneath my fingernails. So even though I am going to be really diligent about how I wash my hands before and after. I just prefer not to have chicken meat and fat under my fingernails. So any of these big pieces of like fat and skin, I'm going to go ahead and keep with my bones and my broth, but I'm just looking, oh, look at all that great juice coming off. I'm just going to pull these big pockets of meat off the back. Yep, that's still hot. And you can be as diligent as you want. You know, when you go to the trouble to do all this work and buy the organic meat, you really want to make the best use of it. And this is definitely the slowest part of the process. So if you buy your chicken already parted, then you don't have all these bones and little pieces of meat to utilize, but you also don't have this tedious work to deal with. So I'm just going to work my way around the bird, pulling off all the meat that I can. If you get a couple of really small bones in here, by the time you pressure can them, you're really not going to notice them. However, any of these larger bones, I'm going to be really diligent about not including. My family's a little bit persnickety, so I do try to be pretty careful. And I did make the mistake of trying to recruit one of my kids to help me the last time I made it, and they basically pulverized all of the chicken. I'd actually cooked it overnight in the roaster first, and because when you do that, everything kind of just falls apart, which is great. It just for kids wasn't the best solution for our household. I don't want to have to mess with every single little tiny bone in the neck, so I'm liking doing this while it's not quite as fall apart tender. And I still like having all of that in the broth. I just don't want to have to deal with it in here. And if you don't want to go to the trouble to roast your chicken first, you can absolutely take those backs and take them completely raw and just add them to your roaster. They will work out just fine. Maybe an extra step that you don't want to fiddle with, and that's fine too. And if you don't want to use this meat for canned meat, you can absolutely leave it in your broth. It will be just fine in there. I just like to try and take advantage of all the parts that I have, especially when I have the freezer space to store it until I've accumulated enough to make a big batch of broth. And the kids are finally at an age where they can kind of help themselves, or at least some of them can. And they may not always be as diligent about getting all the meat off of everything. So it makes me not worry about it so much. I'll just take whatever's left, freeze it, and then use it later. Okay, so this is 4 of my chicken carcasses that are now in here. I've got, no, this is 5 of them. Then I've got 4 more that are in the oven right now, and I'm going to be adding those to it. Right now, I'm just going to top this off with a little bit of water. And after I add my remaining chicken bones, I will see how it looks. But I would imagine I'm going to fill this entire thing up because I'm going to have 9 chicken backs, skins, necks, all of the extras. Okay, so my chicken broth slash stock has been cooking overnight. I left it on 200 degrees and it's coming along quite nicely. I'm going to go ahead and add my vegetables to this now. I am going to cut up a few carrots and a couple of my onions. I don't have any celery right now, so I'm going to skip that. Okay, so I went ahead and just quartered my onions. I'm going to put the skin and everything in there. Generally, I keep these peelings and then I will use them when I make stocks, but I have recently made quite a lot of stock, so I didn't have any of that left. And then for my carrots, I did cut the stem end off, but I did not peel them or anything else. And then I also added 2 of these cubes of garlic. I like to pre-dice peel my garlic and then I freeze it in ice cubes so that it's easier to use. And there you can see our lovely pickles are finished. Okay, so now I'm going to put the lid back on and let it cook for another couple hours with the vegetables in it. And I just do that so the vegetables don't overcook. Okay, so now that all my vegetables have cooked in my broth for a bit, I'm going to go ahead and just strain all of my meat and bones and extra pieces of vegetables out. Now, this is going to be kind of the first straining. And so if I feel like there's a lot of sediment coming through, I'm going to go back with the cheesecloth later on. And I'm also going to put it in the refrigerator overnight and let the fat skim off of it. And I like to just transfer this to another container while I'm waiting and let it continue to drain off. And so I'll usually just do that with a second container with a real basic colander, and then I can pour that whole liquid. Then I can pour this whole liquid back through. So once this is finished draining, I'll move it over here and let it drain a little bit more and keep straining. And the whole idea here really is to get all of my big pieces out. I want to let it cool in the refrigerator so I can make sure that I get all the fat skimmed off of it. And then I'm going to have to heat it back up to can it anyways. So at that point, I will run it through an actual cheesecloth. That kind of keeps my cheesecloth from having to get dirty twice. Okay, I'm gonna let that keep draining. And I'm gonna pour back through the drippings from my other colander. And then I'm gonna let that continue to drip. Oh no! Well, I guess I'm gonna strain that again. All right, since I had to dump that back and forth anyways, I hadn't planned to do that until round 2, but here we are, and we're going to just roll with it. I'm going to go ahead and line my strainer here with a cheesecloth and go ahead and do that strain while I'm here. Okay, so I've had this chilling overnight in our refrigerator, and I'm going to go ahead and skim off some of the fat before I can it. I did take about a gallon out of it yesterday to make 2 different soups that we have in the fridge, and I wasn't worried about the fat in that, but I don't want to can all of this fat in my broth. So I'm going to go ahead and skim that off, and then we'll get the jars ready and get the canners going. It is still dark outside. I'm trying to get a jump start on my day. And because this is an induction cooktop and I have an All-American canner, and that is an aluminum based canner, it will not work on an induction. And it is really something you ought to be careful with any glass top. And a pressure canner, definitely read your owner's manual. But I'm going to be using my All-American outside on a propane cooker. A lot of the propane cookers have more BTUs than your inside stove. So you do have to be really careful with that. Definitely make sure that you're making an informed choice on whether or not you're going to do the same thing. I never use my burner at more than 50% outside. So that's a decision we made so that I would be able to continue to can in this house. Okay, and while I'm waiting for that broth to come up to temperature, I'm also going to be processing this pork loin. And as I've said a couple times now, I'm kind of clearing out the freezer so that I can have room for this whole beef we've got coming in. So I'm taking some of my smaller cuts like this and I'm going to go ahead and can them. The first thing I want to do is get this into a more manageable size. And I'm going to be putting these into quart jars, but I want to make sure that they're small enough that they'll come out easily. But they don't have to be tiny. They are going to pressure can for 90 minutes, so they're going to get nice and tender. So if there's any big fat pockets, I'm going to go ahead and trim those off. But for the most part, this is a pretty lean cut. I'm not super worried about it. Then I'll just take what's remaining here and cube it up, hold it in the pot until I'm ready to put it in the jars. I do like to use these cutting boards under my, or excuse me, oops, cookie sheets under my cutting board just to make sure that none of my drippings are getting anywhere. I still am going to be really diligent when I clean the countertops later, but I just feel a little bit better about making sure it's contained. So I'm going to do some of these a little bit smaller. I find that most of the time the meat really pulls apart like shredded chicken. So I'll probably leave some of them a little bit larger for soups and stews. But if I know it's going to go in a casserole, I like to start with the smaller chunks just to make it one less step on the night where we're going to eat it. Now, the beauty of the chicken stock is when I can that, it only actually needs to be pressure cooked for 20 minutes. However, if I don't have a full canner load, I can always let the chicken stock go in the canner a little bit longer with some of these other items that need to cook a bit more. So if I don't have a full canner load of this pork, I can always put in the chicken stock and let it cook for that full 90 minutes. You wouldn't want to do that with something like green beans that would cook to death. But and again, you could probably leave this, but I just find that we don't like it in the finished product as much, so I'm just going to trim most of it off. This roast is so cold, my fingers are getting numb. And I'm going to keep these rather plain. I'm going to just give it a basic seasoning. Um, with a little bit of onion and a little bit of garlic. And then that way, when I pull it out, whatever dish I'm putting it into, I can choose how I want to season it then. Sometimes when you can things, the seasonings get stronger and stronger. So be careful, be mindful of what you're placing in there, and especially of how long it's going to sit in your pantry. Okay, and then also in the spirit of having a full canner load, I have pulled one of these segments of my corned beef, and I'm going to can that. I've pulled it out of the brine. It's been in the brine for 5 days. The rest of it, I'm actually going to leave in the brine for an additional 5 days, but because the flavors get so much more potent when you're canning, I don't want to can it after it's been in the brine that long. So it does have a lot of seasoning on it. I am going to cut the fat off and then cube it just like we did for the pork. And then that's also going to process for 90 minutes. I am trying to remove more of the fat than I would have if I were going to cook this normally because I don't want to have all of that in the canner. So we really need to get all of this visible fat off. And if I would have realized I was going to try this before I soaked it, I would have gotten more of this fat off then. All right, so I'm going to cut this into similar size chunks, just like I did for my other roast. And I'm probably only going to get a quart out of this. I haven't actually canned corned beef before. I've done brisket by itself, but not when it's already been corned. So I'm going to kind of see how that works out for us. I want to make sure it's not too flavored. So now my broth is boiling. I've got my hot jars ready to go, and I'm going to fill my jars up. I'm using my narrow mouth jars right now because I like to save my wide mouth for things that are harder to pour out. And whenever I'm canning broth, I always try to keep it tidy, but at the end of the day, I just know that this is going to be a bit of a messy endeavor. Some people like to use a pitcher to pour it. I don't want to put hot broth into a plastic pitcher. Feel a little bit better about this ladle, but not much. But it's so much bigger than my other ladle, I kind of suffer through it. But this broth looks delicious. And the soup last night that I made with it was really good. So I am getting a little bit of the chicken on the outside of my jars. So I am going to have to wipe down the rims. We always want to wipe those down with a little bit of white vinegar. So I know I can fit 7 of these in my Presto canner and 14 in my All-American. So depending on how many jars I actually end up with will help me decide which canner I'm going to use. And that way I can use the other canner for the meat that needs to process longer if I need. Okay, so this is my 7 jars that will fit in the Presto canner. And I think I need one more jar, and I will process one lone jar with my meat, or maybe 2. Okay, so this last jar is mostly filled. I'm going to add a little bit of filtered water just to top it off. This is a really thick broth. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a little bit of vinegar and wipe each of these rims. Make sure that I have no fat anywhere near the tops. I want to make a really good seal. Okay, so then I'm going to place, I like to use these Tatler lids. They're a reusable option. Of course, you can use the regular canning lids. And then the same is true on, you just want to get it fingertip tight. And then we'll go load these up in the canner. I felt like that was a problem. Sometimes with some of my older jars, I have issues with them wanting to grip down over the entire Tatler lid. So occasionally with some of my jars, I just find it's better if it doesn't feel like it wants to fingertip tight and then stay on to go with something thinner. Right now, I have some Superb lids that I'm using. I'm liking those. I also like the 4 jar or the ball. Uh, I knew I had a culprit bad jar in here. I need to just take that jar out of the mix, but you know. So now I'm just going to transfer these outside and get them loaded into the canner. And they are very hot already, so definitely I don't want to hold on to them for long. So I know that that will fill the bottom of my Presto canner, and then I'm going to put these last 2 jars in my All-American with the other meat, and they will just get 90 minutes instead of 25 that these jars are going to need. So I'm going to put these in the canner, bring it up to my correct altitude pressure. The one in the Presto is going to get 25 minutes, and then the one in the All-American can just hang tight with the other meats for the full 90 minutes. Okay, so now I'm going to can up my additional meat that's going to help me fill up the rest of that pressure cooker. I'm going to start with my corned beef. This already was soaked for 5 days in that brine, so I am not going to add any additional seasonings to this. I just want to see kind of how it comes out. And I did grab hot jars, and I've got hot water ready to add to it. I'm going to make sure and leave plenty of space so that it can get surrounded by water well. Using my electric water bath canner over there to heat all my water. Give it a little bit of a push to see if I can't get this to fit in 2 jars. I don't want to jam pack it. I want to make sure that I have enough room for my liquids to surround it, but I think that will work. I'm going to come back and just top them off with hot water until I've got about an inch of headspace left. Oops. I hate this cup. It just drips everywhere. At least it's just water. Okay, I'm going to grab my debubbler or anything plastic or silicone, and I'm just going to go around the outside, make sure that I get any of my bubbles loose, make sure that I've got enough liquid to cover my meats, and I still have my headspace that I want. Make sure and get all the air out of that jar. Okay, then I will take my vinegar again, and I'm going to give it a quick wipe down, and we'll get our lids on these guys. I do have a ton. I bought a lot of jars this year, so I have a lot of full size lids to get through. So I'm going to use some of my ball lids out of these. And then so they don't pull off on the countertop while I'm getting the pork ready, I'm going to go ahead and put these out in the canner. Okay, so now we'll can up our pork. I have room for 3 more jars in the bottom layer. I do have a canner that is tall enough to do 2 layers of my quart jars. So I probably am going to have to get that second layer out, but that's okay. To keep some diced onions in the fridge that I cut up probably about once a week and try to use them throughout the week. And then if I don't, I can always saute them in butter on that last day. And somehow they always just. Okay, so I like to mince my garlic all at one time, and then I freeze them into cubes and then pull them out of the ice trays later on so that I can use them to cook. So it's roughly about 4 cloves to each ice cube. So now I've got my garlic finished. Okay, so now we'll add our hot water. I'm going to fill it up until there's about an inch of headspace, and then we'll debubble. So I may have to top back out with some water, and that's okay. When you have all this meat, it's really easy to have bubbles form that you want to make sure that you get those all liberated to the top so you know what your water level is. Now we'll grab a clean spot on our towel and some more of our distilled vinegar. We'll just wipe the rims and get our lids on. And if you're curious about fingertip tight, I feel like if I spin it on my glass countertop, it doesn't actually, it needs to be a hair tighter than that. So I just like to anchor it with my fingertips and just give it a little bit of pressure back. You don't want to crank them on. You just need a little bit of pressure. All right, let's go move these out to the canner. Okay, so I've got all of my cans on the bottom layer of this canner. I've got one more that I can put in. And then this will take an actual second layer, and then we'll put that last one in. Then I'm going to pop on my lid and get it up to pressure. Okay, so now I've got both my lids on, and I'm just going to be waiting for them to start to come up to pressure. I will see steam coming out of the vents, and I will let that steam come out for 10 minutes before I place my weight on there. So my Presto canner is up to temperature and starting to steam now, but my All-American is a little bit slower to heat up. It will hold the heat longer, so that's okay. But I'm going to go ahead and start my 10-minute timer on the Presto canner, and that way I can go ahead and get that weighted gauge on there sooner. So my timer just went off. It's been steaming for the full 10 minutes. I'm still waiting for my All-American to come up to pressure, but I did start with the meat that was cold and then the hot water. So I'll go ahead and bump the heat up on that here in just a minute, and I will set this weight on and we'll start to wait for it to come up to pressure. So now I'm going to be looking for this to pop up, and this is going to go ahead and read all the way over to 10 because that's the pressure that we need here. And then once that starts to happen, then it will start to kind of teeter totter back and forth, and you'll hear it kind of make that ch noise, and we'll start our timer then. Okay, so now I have steam. Not sure if we can see it coming out of this vent as well. So I can start my 10-minute timer on the All-American. Okay, so now the All-American has been venting for 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and place my weight. This weight is slightly different. It has 3 different sides. So we're going to choose the side that says 10. I'm going to put that side down, and I'm going to let that come up to pressure again. So I'll be watching this come up to 10 pounds. And I'm going to go ahead and turn up the speed on my Presto. I was kind of keeping it a little lower, so hopefully I could start the timers at the same time, and it looks like that may work out. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to make some sourdough discard crackers. So I typically like to have about 1 cup of sourdough discard to a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of butter. And I'm just going to kind of mix that together. I am not going for the prettiest cracker award here. I just want something that they can have on the table that they feel like is a good snack. And I'm making a double batch today because I have so much discard left here. So I'm just stirring the butter into my already ready to go discard. And then I'm going to throw a little bit of seasoning in here as well. I like to do my Italian blend from Azure Standard. I do want quite a lot of this because I feel like it's easy for that flavor to disappear. And then I'm going to put this onto 2 different cookie sheets here. And you can add whatever seasonings you like. A lot of people like to put their seasonings just on the top, but I prefer to have a little bit mixed throughout just in case, I make them a little bit too thick. That happens sometimes. Okay. So the other thing that I like to do is I've got these silicone liners that I really like to use. It kind of keeps everything from sticking. And then I just spray them with a little bit of olive oil prior to putting my dough on there. That way they don't stick. And I'm going to basically split this recipe between the 2 trays. I'm just going to kind of give this a light spread, get it nice and thin. And sometimes you can let gravity do the work for you. Not quite as much fun as one of those artists that do all the crazy color combos. And I have preheated my oven to 325. I do have a convection oven, and so I am using that extra air movement to kind of help me. I want dried, crispy crackers. They don't have to be perfect, but my family does typically like them when they're not so chewy. And this was a really big batch. I probably should have made this into 3 trays, but sometimes you just don't have time for all that. We like the everything bagel seasoning, and this is a jar I have refilled with the Azure organic variety. I was in a pinch and I bought one at the store, and I now have a labeled jar. So there we go. So I'm going to be really generous and give that a heavy sprinkling on both. And then if you like to salt, this is the time where I would salt it. You could mix it into the dough, but I find that my family notices the salt more when I put it on top. And then I don't have to salt it quite as heavily. So I am really generous with the seasonings. And then fairly light with my salt. Now I'm going to put these in the oven for 10 minutes and then I will pull them out and kind of give them a quick slice and then continue to bake them. Okay, so next I'm just going to score this and I'm going to cheat and use a pizza cutter. Again, I don't need these to be beautiful. I just want them to be my crackers. I'll probably leave one tray out on the countertop and the kids will eat them all today. And the other one I will let cool and then bag up. It smells delicious. I like it when you say that.
Mom,
Yes.
what are these?
Mommy is not making square breakfast today. We're going to have some quadrilaterals.
How long ago? The movies were great long ago.
Oh, movies were great? You mean black and white?
Yep.
So you're comparing your pencils to black and white movies? I love it. You're so creative. Okay, Mom's gonna go check on the pressure canner. So I stopped them a little bit early. These are always one of those things that I just kind of play by ear. And as soon as they're really starting to pull apart like that, I'm going to let them cool on these silicone baking mats and then I will break them and put them into jars. Okay, so I'm just going to take the remaining crackers and then throw them in the jar. And these will probably disappear in another day or two. But this is why I like to cut them up a little bit smaller. If I was going to put them in a Ziploc baggie, I'd probably go with something a little larger. And there we have it. Okay, getting close, but it is not quite there. You can hear it's not quite doing the hula dance, and we're just under 10 pounds of pressure. And the All-American is coming up to temperature, albeit a little bit slower. I'll probably turn up the heat just a hair. I don't want to overdo it since this particular Camp Chef will put out more BTUs than the All-American is rated for. Right. Okay, so now both of my gauges are measuring at 10 psi. There goes the All-American. I want to hear it do that about 3 times a minute. And you can see my Presto is just kind of jiggling along. It's letting a tiny bit out, but not crazy. Well, that stinks, but we can make it work. The All-American did not have any issues at all. Okay, guys, that was my first time trying to can with that Presto canner outside. And unfortunately, this is such a thinner walled pot. It definitely fluctuates on its heat a lot more than my All-American. I like them both. In my old home, I used them both on my gas stove and they were totally fine. But it does lose heat and gain heat a lot faster. So keep that in mind if you're using it. Again, this is not a full-on review of both types. I can definitely do that. If you guys are interested, comment below and let me know. But I think there's a lot of those out there already. I did go ahead and reprocess those chicken broths that didn't seal. Unfortunately, that's just part of the game sometimes. But I went ahead and processed a little bit more and I got 100% seal rate on all of them. So I ended up with 16 quarts of chicken broth and then an additional gallon that I took out. So for my 9 chickens, I think that's a lot of really nutritious bone chicken broth. 2 quarts of my corned beef to try. I can't wait to try those and see how they ended up. And then 4 quarts of my pork loin. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial and kind of cook with me in the kitchen this week. And I'm trying to get that freezer emptied. So we're just getting a lot of stuff processed. So thanks for joining me this week on all the things we had going on in the kitchen, and I can't wait to see you next time. But I went ahead and processed a little bit more, and I got 100% seal rate on all of them. I'm so sorry.